Good morning, everyone. Now that we have our online participants online with us, thank you all for joining us today, and really welcome to the Wilson Center. We are congressionally chartered, scholarship-driven, and fiercely nonpartisan. The Wilson Center's Global Europe program that I direct focuses on the global challenges facing Europe and how European countries are responding to those. Often, the solutions are multilateral and through institutions like the Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. OSCE grew from its origins as a conference, which was a way of monitoring implementation of the Helsinki Accords, to today's organization with offices, outreach, and conflict prevention missions. OSCE has always been an innovator, and that's its superpower as an organization, which is why we are so delighted to welcome today the OSCE's Secretary General. There is no one better to tell us about the current challenges facing the OSCE and the challenges for the future. Helga Schmid has had a distinguished career as a German diplomat. She was also the Secretary General of the European Union's External Action Service. Wow, that is a job. And she effectively was running the EU's diplomatic corps. Her negotiating skills made her a leader in reaching agreement on the JCPOA, and she's been OSCE Secretary General since December of 2020. I'm also welcoming one of our own, Ambassador Phil Rieker, who knows Helga well from his days as Assistant Secretary of State for Europe in the State Department. He was also our ambassador to North Macedonia, later civilian deputy to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe at the headquarters in Stuttgart, and more recently our acting ambassador to the United Kingdom. When he left London, Secretary Blinken said, "Please be a senior advisor for Caucasus negotiations." And that brought him back to the OSCE, which has been engaged in that region for many years. So Phil is now, thankfully, the chair of the Global Europe program at Wilson. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to hand this over to Phil, and he'll have a discussion with Helga for a few minutes. Then I'm going to offer up an opportunity for questions. For those of you in the room, don't worry, I can see you, so get your questions ready. For those of you who are participating online, please go to the event page and you can send in your questions, and I will monitor them on my little laptop here, okay? So I'm looking forward to this vibrant discussion. Thank you all very much for coming, and Phil, over to you.
Well, thank you, Robin, and welcome to everybody, particularly to the Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, my friend, my colleague, Ambassador Helga Schmid. It's a particularly poignant moment for me. I got to pull out my OSCE badge here, which I don't get to wear often, but this badge comes from 1994 in my first assignment as a younger Foreign Service officer in Budapest, where the summit of what was then the CSCE declared that it would become the OSCE and the structure that we have today. Of course, the current chair in office, a rotating position that rotates annually among the 57 participating states of OSCE, is North Macedonia, a country I'm very familiar with, and we're delighted to have the ambassador of North Macedonia, Zoran Popov, with us today. And of course, welcome to our online audience, which I know is considerable. I wanted to begin our conversation by making sure people realize the context of what the OSCE does. It is coming up on 50 years since the signing of the Helsinki Final Act by, at that time, 35 participating states, which took place, obviously, in Helsinki on August 1st. So next week we will be at the 48th anniversary of that Helsinki Final Act. And the key principles, the themes that drive and the functioning of the OSCE and its purpose were outlined then, really forming the backbone of what OSCE focuses on. And these were concepts, principles agreed to by all of the countries signing at that time. And they defined three dimensions, of course, a political and military dimension, an economic dimension, and a human dimension. And perhaps we'll get Secretary General Schmid to talk a little bit about those. As we look to this 50th anniversary and what should be a time to really celebrate what we've accomplished using the OSCE as a critical part of the transatlantic and, dare I say, broad North America, Eurasia area in terms of an institution that addresses security, cooperation, and a whole host of issues, we instead see a time of challenges and difficulty. It's no secret that there is tension in Europe. Obviously, the situation in Ukraine we will address and discuss. And many point to paralysis at the OSCE, which is an organization that operates on consensus. 57 participating states, each with the same position in terms of their ability to block or to support efforts to move forward on such a wide range of issues. So I thought, Helga, it'd be interesting to start by talking about how you see OSCE right now at this moment, 48 years since the signing of the Helsinki Final Act, and anticipating this 50th anniversary. People think paralysis, but in fact, there's a lot going on. Just look at your schedule, your agenda, the types of issues you're addressing at OSCE. What would you say to this audience about what's happening at OSCE today?
I don't have to push anywhere.
I think you're on.
You're on.
I'm on. Okay. Thanks so much. And I would start by saying OSCE is more relevant than ever. But before, let me say thank you for having me today. It's always great to be in Washington. Actually, I started my own career in Washington as a press attaché in the German embassy a long time ago, actually in the mid-90s. Right after German unification, it was a fantastic opportunity for me. And what I would say is also German unification would not have happened without the CSCE process. Now, so our roots are in the Cold War, you're right, and you rightly mentioned the Helsinki Principles. For me, the Helsinki Final Act is still one of the most important documents of our times, defining very clear principles, commitments everyone indeed signed up to. By the way, even climate change is already there, back in 1975, which is, I think, very, and I'll come to that in a moment because we also do a lot of work on climate change. But now we are in 2023. Why do I say the OSCE is more relevant than ever? Because I think we are a unique organization. Why? Well, we are unique because we really bring everyone together that is relevant to Eurasian security. It's our membership, 57 countries, spanning 3 continents. The US is there, Canada is there, Russia is there, Ukraine is there, Central Asia is there, the whole of Europe is there, 1.3 billion people. But it's also what you also alluded to, it's the way we approach security. And I have to say I'm very proud of that because I think we were probably the first organization to define the fact that security is always not only political military security, it's also the environmental aspects, increasingly so. Take climate change, that is a real threat multiplier. It's the security aspects to the economic side, and it's the very important human dimension, what we call human dimension, respect for fundamental freedoms, human rights, non-discrimination, women's rights. And the way we address it is that we see it as complementary. So I know there is some people say, well, the OSCE is paralyzed, etc. I have to say, yes, we're facing challenges, like everyone is facing challenges these times, unheard challenges with war back on European soil. We have the climate emergency. And of course, there is a threat to multilateralism. So we're facing the same challenges other multilateral organizations are facing. But we are going very strong. So we're doing a lot of work. Just maybe to provide some examples. So the way we operate is that if a participating state requests our support, we're trying to deliver that support, including in Ukraine, for example. I had to close all our missions in Ukraine. We had the largest monitoring mission there. We had a mission there that was working on environmental projects. But we are back in Ukraine with almost 70 staff. We are doing very concrete work at the request of the Ukrainian government to support them on humanitarian demining. We support them on cybersecurity. We provide psychosocial support to women. We're finalizing a new project on children. That's very important. I mentioned climate change. The added value we bring is that we promote regional cooperation. We bring countries together that do not always see eye to eye. You're a real expert, of course, on the Western Balkans. So we, just to give you one example, so we brought together North Macedonia, our current chair, a fantastic chair, I have to say, with a clear, the motto here is, it's about people, and this is indeed what it is about. So we've brought together North Macedonia, Albania, and Kosovo. They share the Shire Mountains, and there are lots of challenges, and so they have done a joint analysis of what's happening there with illegal logging, for example, and wildfires, which is an increasing challenge everywhere. But we also bring them together for joint solutions, so to work more on disaster risk reduction, to empower women to work more on sustainable livelihoods. And we are replicating this now elsewhere, from the South Caucasus to Central Asia. At the climate conference I hosted like 2 weeks ago, the 5 environment ministers of Central Asia came. Some of them met for the first time. We were sitting around the table discussing some of the issues they're all facing, like water, energy security. So that's the work we do, supporting countries finding joint solutions. Or take, for example, the fight against human trafficking. Very few people know that this is a huge challenge with, I would say, probably 25 million victims a year. There's almost impunity. With the war now, you have, of course, and with lots of refugees, 80% of them are women and children. They are particularly exposed. So what we have been doing, and we're really leading there, to work with governments to raise awareness, to also work on online exploitation, because a lot of it these days is sexual online exploitation. It's absolutely important work to do. Yeah. I'm very grateful to the US. The US has been a great supporter of this. And I could go on and on. These are just some challenges. But what's quite important to see, and I think the fight against human trafficking is a good example. It's a security issue because a lot of it is organized crime that's involved, but it's of course also a human rights issue because it affects mostly women and children. So you have to look at the different aspects. You have to work on the demand side. You have to work with law enforcement agents. You have to work with civil society. It's very important for us wherever, with all our field missions, we very much work with civil society to address this problem in a holistic manner. That's indeed what we call the comprehensive approach. And with our 12 field missions, with our institutions, we're doing really great work on the ground and much appreciated by the host governments.
I want to explore the field missions because I think they're often overlooked by people who just see OSCE at its headquarters in Vienna with high-level conferences and formal structures, which are important in the world of diplomacy and security. But first, I think it's important to underscore the theme, as you noted, of North Macedonia this year's chair in office and Foreign Minister Osmani. It's about people. And the OSCE space from North America across Eurasia encompasses more than 1 billion.
1.3 billion.
1.3 billion people. At 57 participating states members, it is the largest organization of its kind, almost rivaling the United Nations in terms of its gathering and convening ability, bringing together, as you point out, countries that may not even be able to engage with each other as neighbors. And at the heart of that, of course, is the idea enshrined in the Helsinki Accords of sovereign equality, respect for the rights inherent in sovereignty, from the tiniest states, Andorra, Liechtenstein, the Holy See, to the Russian Federation, to Ukraine. Sovereignty is key at that. That's one of the key S words, and I also like to point out that when we talk about ESG, a theme that is so much in our discussion in Europe and here in the United States, sometimes with controversy. But the S in ESG is as much security as it is social, because without the security, without addressing these issues, without focusing on sovereignty, we can't address some of these broader social issues. How do you see the field missions and what you're doing in 12 different missions, bringing the principles, the Helsinki principles, the fundamental structure of the OSCE into practice? Because my experience in the Western Balkans has been very positive in that, from election monitoring to these full-time field missions on the ground.
So we have Western Balkans, I think, is a good example. In Kosovo, we have a mandate under 1244. So we have a very big mission there that is helping with judicial integration, police integration, working closely, of course, with the European Union, with EU-led dialogue when it comes to Belgrade and Pristina. Take Bosnia, with all the challenges it represents. And here we also have a mandate under Dayton, but I think the added value our field missions bring is that we do not only work with governments, we really very much work with the local level. We have a large field presence there, so we bring mayors together. We do a lot on reconciliation. It's still very important there. Also publicly, I think that is quite important. I mean, if you have the chance to watch it on YouTube, it's really worth doing it. So we brought together 3 war veterans to have a conversation. They all lost loved ones in the war, and now they did a video together. That was we brought them together. They are now going to schools, and the message is we don't know how we ever got into that war. Very, very powerful message. Also to work with the younger people. That's also some of our key commitments to work with youth, bring young people in, also as stakeholders of tomorrow. Also to really discuss this broad approach to security and women, as I mentioned. But then we have the 3 dimensions. What we do is we help participating states to live up to their commitments, but also offer our support, particularly when it comes to capacity building upon their request. And that's the strength, because I come from the European Union. I've worked there for many years. And particularly in countries that are candidate countries or are already negotiating in the accession process, they have to fulfill 30,000 pages of acquis, etc. In our case, the program is agreed together. So the heads of our missions agree with the host country the program. That gives a lot of strong ownership, and we work very often also at the legislative level. Quite important. We work on rights for disabled people. We work on bringing more women into the police, for example. We did that in Montenegro. We work on the implementation of programs. We work in support of judicial reform processes. We do a lot of work when it comes to fighting transnational threats and challenges. I've put forward a framework program that helps particularly Central Asian countries to fight some of the challenges coming their way from Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover. But also what we always try to do is help them grasp the opportunities for working together for regional cooperation. This is very important. We have I should mention that we have a fantastic representative for the freedom of the media, Teresa Ribeiro. She is doing very good work, and she is very consequential. So there is no west or east or etc. Whenever she spots something, she will address it. Safety of journalists, women, female journalists are particularly exposed also to hate messages online, for example. That's part of the work she does. We have our High Commissioner for National Minorities, a former Foreign Minister of Kazakhstan, very, very experienced colleagues. His mandate is very discreet, so he will not do public statements that would not be in line with his mandate, but he tries to see what he does is conflict prevention in the best sense. He advises governments, he works also again with the local level to try and diffuse tensions really at the local level, so to say. And you mentioned election observation. With of course have our office ODIHR in Warsaw that have a very strong mandate when it comes to promoting fundamental freedoms, human rights, and election observation. So, but again, I think what is our added value is that we bring the dots together, because it's never one-dimensional. There are always the different sides to it, and or climate change. I mean, when John Kerry came to my climate conference 3 weeks ago, he also made a strong point about the impact climate change has on the social cohesion, so and even on health. It's also it has a clear impact also on health, I think, and this is so really addressing security from that holistic angle is our strength. Yeah. And I have to say there is, and this is very gratifying to see for me how well and how openly also our offers for capacity building is received. I'm very particularly interested in promoting women's empowerment, also women's economic empowerment. I've created a network of in all 57 participating states of women leaders, peace builders, mediators. That is a very powerful network, and we provide training, capacity building for women, for example, in Central Asia, in the water sector, energy sector, etc. I think that is, we do it with little money. I always say we're a very cheap organization because we mostly work with local staff. And the figures I always give is because we're 1.3 billion and we cost like 20 cents per year per citizen. So it's good investment. It's real added value for money. It was my message also to the Secretary of State yesterday. I said there we bring real added value and real value for money. So.
I want to come back to you.
It's important in these times because, of course, everyone is competing for resources.
Everyone's looking at resources.
You have to make the case for the work you do.
You have challenges in how you do resources at OSCE, despite your relatively small budget, given the numbers of people, the numbers of countries. You mentioned, of course, the European Union. Many countries within the OSCE space are aspirants, and many of the EU members obviously are already members, participating states at OSCE. It's the one organization that brings together everyone in these different fields, and countries, I think, can work together there as they look at their aspirations in other directions as well. Empowerment, I think, is critical. When I was at European Command and working with the generals, very much focus on women in peace and security and the role of women. These are the 4 stars who were saying we need to engage women in the community in terms of a role in understanding what is security really about, and a much more holistic attitude. And I think OSCE has a great chance there to work closely with militaries while you remain a non-military organization, but to share thoughts and ideas on that. And I also think your point on the legislative level and how you advise, I've seen that in the field, is crucial. You have a parliamentary assembly as well, and here in Washington, certainly our partners, as Robin mentioned, Wilson Center is congressionally mandated. We have a charter from the Congress, and we work very closely with the Helsinki Commission, which is the group of bipartisan senators and members of the House that focus on OSCE issues. Can you comment just a little more, and then we'll come back to some issues on Ukraine, about working with parliaments and the Parliamentary Assembly, because I think that also brings it down to the level of people and elected officials that represent them.
I'm a huge supporter of the Parliamentary Assembly. I just met with the newly elected president, who was also attending our climate conference in Vienna. I met with the Helsinki Commission on the Hill yesterday. I always do that when I have the opportunity to meet them. When I arrived as the newly elected Secretary General, of course, I had great ideas, like everyone that comes into office has. And but there were 3 or 4 issues that were particularly relevant for me. First was this whole of the OSCE approach and this is because we all have our separate mandates. Our institutions have their own programmatic mandates. I'm as Secretary General, I'm the chief administrative officer, and the secretariat is under me, but the institutions have their own mandates. But for me, it was very important that we have a close cooperation, coordination, including with the Parliamentary Assembly. And this is what we do. I had an excellent conversation on the Hill yesterday. I shared the latest we're doing. They do their own initiatives. They reinforce the work we do. So I think this is quite important. But it's not only the Parliamentary Assembly. It's also when I travel, I try to see parliaments, foreign affairs committees, parliamentarians, because their support is critical. Also to do a bit of raising visibility, because this is some of the issues we have been struggling with as OSCE, because we have been there for a long time, and as we had a very strong I would say very powerful achievements in the 90s, also with the arms control architecture we've been setting up, which is really unique. And I often heard from colleagues in Asia that they were really envious with that architecture. Now, I would probably paint a too rosy picture if I said that it's still all going strong. We know about what happened with CFE, Open Skies, etc. The Vienna document is still there. But I would also say, and I forgot to say it in the beginning, as you asked me about 25, and indeed the upcoming 50th anniversary is, at this point, the state of play is as it is. But at some point, when trust is rebuilt, you will have to come back to conventional arms control. Yeah. This is absolutely crucial, and you will have to do it in an inclusive manner. And this is why I said in the beginning, everyone relevant to Eurasian security is around the table. And there is also some work that will need to be done to reflect the latest technological developments. Take AI, artificial intelligence. The world has changed ever since 2011. This is the Vienna document. And again, here the OSCE will be the platform, but trust will need to be rebuilt. But the visibility issue is important, because we do a lot of good work. Some of the work, particularly and this is an issue I also had in the European Union, when you're engaged in mediation or conflict prevention, by essence, it sometimes has to be discreet. And every conflict that's being avoided doesn't make it to the headlines.
That's right.
But when you have, so for me, it's also very important to showcase the good work we do with and do that together. So together with the institutions, but also the Parliamentary Assembly. And here, of course, the parliamentarians
play a role.
Are amplifiers indeed, and play a role. And I also need them for the budget to convince their governments on the budget.
Well, I hope you were successful.
We had a very good meeting, so I got a lot of support.
Good, and Wilson Center certainly.
But let me say, I also said it publicly yesterday. For me, the US is crucial, really, to the OSCE. Has been there from the beginning. We have a fantastic ambassador. With my carpenter in Vienna, so U.S. support is really very important.
And it underscores, I think, what President Biden said, Secretary Blinken coming into office, about the importance of partnerships, alliances, allies, partners, working on those relationships. It's crucial, and the institutions that are so key to it, like OSCE. In that,
can I say something
please,
on that?
Please,
because indeed partnerships are important, and I think this has always been my mantra also in the European Union. We can't do it alone. I think it's very important that we identify, as a regional organization, our respective strengths, and then find a way to really pull synergies to work together. And I'm very supportive of the new agenda for peace that has been put forward by the UN Secretary General, because what it does, it analyzes the current threats to and challenges to security, and there are many, including the climate emergency, the threats to the UN Charter, the threats to international norms, the threats to women's rights. There is also a backlash there. So, but we shouldn't be stuck with the analysis. We have to find a way forward, and I think the way forward is also to make sure that regional organizations can play to their full strength. So, we actively participate also as OSCE and that consultation process. And for me, this is very important, because there are many threats to multilateralism these days. But the world of the 21st century, with all the threats, they are all transnational by nature. You will not be able, no country can actually confront them alone. You will need the support also of regional organizations. And here, of course, the OSCE is a very relevant and a very important, cost-effective player.
You expanded that over years geographically as well, because I think many people aren't aware that OSCE, besides its 57 participating states, maintains sort of partnerships in Asia, including Afghanistan, and also in the Mediterranean region, which is crucial to the broader area of responsibility.
And I'm a big supporter of working closely with our partners. So I should probably say that our Asian partners is Japan, is South Korea, is Thailand, Australia, and indeed Afghanistan. And we have a very committed female Afghan ambassador in Vienna. We keep her engaged. She is a very brave, very courageous woman in light of what's happening in her country, which is a nightmare for the women. It's also very important for me to make sure that this is not forgotten, particularly the situation of the women and the girls in Afghanistan. That's why, it's always, I think, good to have concrete examples. So we have an academy in Bishkek, in Kyrgyzstan, that is offering postgraduate studies for Central Asian countries, Mongolia, and Afghanistan. And I was in Kyrgyzstan a couple of weeks ago, and I had a very good conversation also with the president, with the foreign minister. It's very important for me that Afghan students, for example, have the opportunity to continue their studies there. And there was this young Afghan student when I visited the academy, it's under the OSCE umbrella, who told me, please, I mean, for our women, the only way to get an education or higher grade education is really outside. So this is why what we are offering there is absolutely crucial. And on the Mediterranean side, it's the Maghreb countries, and it's Egypt, it's Jordan, and it's Israel. And and this is not only a partnership for the sake of discussing security, and it's also clear that security includes this part of the world. I'm also very eager to make sure that we offer concrete projects, concrete work with them. So to give you an example, we have a project on asset recovery with our Med partners. It's quite important in these days to really work on, because again, we work a lot on anti-corruption, also organized crime. This is about confiscating indeed assets that come out of criminal transactions. And then one project we had is even put them to social reuse. That is very,
help your
very
budget.
important. Right. It's not always easy, but these are very concrete projects and very often what we do is work indeed, as I said, with a legislative level, but then also offer training, capacity building, and bring in as many as possible. So also the local level, civil society, get their advice. So that is this inclusive approach.
Again, the range of things that OSCE is undertaking on what is, without question, a very small budget for such a thing is something I think needs more attention, and it's great that you can be here. We talked about your visit to the Hill, to the Helsinki Commission. You mentioned that you saw Secretary Blinken. Can you say a little more about that, the importance of the United States? I know he's committed to our role at OSCE.
I'm really grateful. He's very committed. He's also been publicly committed to the importance of the OSCE. We had an excellent conversation on the work we do with our field missions, Ukraine, Moldova, for example. I haven't mentioned Moldova. In Moldova, we have a mission on the ground that has a mandate to promote finding a settlement in the Transnistrian conflict.
Yeah.
We're the only ones on the ground that ensure, for example, monitoring of the security zone. We facilitate contacts between the two sides, etc. Quite important in light of what's ongoing. But we also support Moldova with programs upon their request on anti-corruption on so many issues. And I think the work we do is much appreciated by the US. The US is also very active. We have currently, out of 12 field missions, 2 heads of missions are American in Moldova and in Bosnia. We have an acting American head of mission in Albania. I have an American chief of staff. She's here, Allison, and I also have this organization works a lot with secondments, a lot more than the European Union, and here I'm also grateful for US support. But the important issue is not only the financial support. I will obviously not deny that. I think it's also the political support, the support to that organization that has an important role to play, but will also have an important role to play in the future.
Yeah.
When you see about what can happen in the future. One area I mentioned already is arms control, is conventional arms control, and the existing architecture.
That's a good segue back to Ukraine, and many people, I think, are unaware of how long there has been an OSCE field mission in Ukraine, long before the current war, even predating the 2014 invasion of Crimea. Looking ahead, and that's always a dangerous thing in our profession, but looking ahead, what do you think might be, or what would you put forward as the possible role or roles for OSCE in any future peace efforts? Perhaps monitoring, mindful that of the Helsinki principles, one among many that are key is peaceful settlement of disputes. What could that be? And then I know we want to get to questions from
That's right. I was just about to remind that after this, I'll open it up. This is also to give the audience time to collect their questions and thoughts, right? So, don't disappoint me. I'm just saying.
No, that is, of course, is a very relevant question. It's a bit difficult to speculate. What I would say is that this organization is inclusive. Everyone relevant is around the table. As I said before, everyone relevant to security. We were the first responders in 2014. I mentioned the special monitoring mission, which really did fantastic work. I mean, they were not only monitoring the ceasefire along the contact line, they also did so much good work to support the conflict-affected people. I was there myself. I could see it with my own eyes. And this is why Minister Osmani's motto this year, it's about people, is so relevant. And this is, and I couldn't agree more with him, is that we need to do the utmost to really help the conflict-affected people who live in the conflict zones are most affected. And this is what our mission also did, is by, for example, negotiating localized ceasefires. They were called the so-called windows of silence, which allowed the local population to repair the infrastructure that was damaged, electricity, etc. And we have a lot of experience there. Of course, SMM does not exist anymore. There was lack of consensus to extend it.
Again, consensus.
Ukraine wanted to extend them. Consensus indeed is our principle. Consensus can be quite important because decisions taken by consensus, and we have the same in the European Union, in foreign policy, are very strong decisions. When they are instrumentalized or politicized, then it becomes a problem, particularly when the budget is concerned.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, I think we are ready, we have the expertise, etc., but this is when the time comes. But obviously you will need someone that can monitor a ceasefire and ensure verification.
And it always is good in my experience to keep in mind OSCE.
Yeah.
It's a toolkit. And the point about consensus, I think, is one, it's OSCE's greatest strength, and sometimes its greatest weakness.
But it must be requested. It must be requested by the side. So, and we're not there.
We're not there yet. And I've always reminded countries, in my experience, whether the Balkans or the South Caucasus, you are each participating states, you're members of OSCE at an equal status, regardless of size or population. Make it your own.
Yeah.
Make it your organization. Find a way to reach a consensus that then allows you to do that and request and ask for things, and that will
And
give
I
us
have to say this, Phil, this is really happening. So I mean, I've known it from the European Union also, where you have bigger and smaller member states. But in the OSCE, we indeed have very small states such as Andorra, San Marino, but they're very much engaged. So they are on, for example, I was in Andorra. They contribute to some of our programs, very much engaged on climate change. There is this group of countries engaged on that have mountains have specific issues on climate change. It's like it's very dramatic, particularly in Central Asia when you see what's happening to the glaciers, etc. So this is what's so good about the OSCE, is this really joint commitment and this commitment to really work together to find solutions or to address certain challenges such as climate change,
and
which is for me one of the existential threats indeed we're facing.
It is a commitment.
And it will spare no one, neither small country nor big
That's
country.
right. We're all in this together, and as part of that commitment that we made to open up for some questions, I'm going to turn it back to Robin, who's great at moderating these things, and take some questions from the audience here with us and also from online.
First, I want to thank you for addressing a couple of issues that came up online in questions. First, the CFE, so thank you for that, because a lot of people have experience with it. With
conventional forces in Europe.
In Europe,
the whole arms control agenda will need to be addressed.
Yeah. Right. And so that is, that's still in the toolkit.
One thing, can I still say one thing? Because we're doing so much good work there, and this is the illegal trade of small arms and light weapons and conventional ammunitions, where we have been active in so many countries to fight that. So this is a very strong, even if certain areas there is maybe less happening, in this area we are really doing a lot of good work from Central Asia to the Western Balkans. And quite important, because this really affects people big time.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, and also for having addressed the Moldova issue that was the subject of another online question. So having acknowledged the online questions, right, I'm going to take a couple questions in the room. Who's up for it? Okay, I'll start here. That's, you. There's microphones coming around. Otherwise, the online participants won't hear you.
Thank you very much. My name is Sebastian Perroz. I'm the director of the Central Asia program at George Washington University. So thank you so much, madam, for all your very interesting points. And you mentioned that you traveled recently to Central Asia. And I'm interested, actually, in hearing your thoughts about the future of cooperation between the OSCE and Central Asia, which has not been, how to say, always straightforward. And especially interested, I wonder, is a war in Ukraine, if Putin's war in Ukraine actually is bringing some new opportunities, it's creating some new dynamics for cooperation, or on the contrary, if it brings, in some cases, some obstacles. Thank you.
The war, of course, is affecting mostly, causing so much human suffering in Ukraine, but of course it has an effect, also an impact on neighboring countries. But what I would say in general is what I have seen, and I have always worked closely with Central Asia when I worked in the European Union. We started working, also encouraging regional cooperation. But what I've seen now is really a strong willingness, first of all, a strong commitment to this organization, precisely also for the issues you have been outlining, and a strong request for programs we offer on capacity building. One issue I have not mentioned is the work we do on border management. We have, for example, a very large project at the border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan, 1,600 kilometers, and where we help the Tajik government with capacity building. But what I see increasingly indeed is also willingness for more regional cooperation, and I think that's probably a realization that many of the threats and challenges really have to be done in cooperation. And climate change I mentioned in April. I organized a meeting with the 5 top border commanders of Central Asia. They came to Vienna. We institutionalize it now, but also they now will meet regularly among themselves. It's quite relevant because, as you know, there are often issues between the Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, also with the lack of border delimitation. So this is a very important part of my personal engagement also, and the support we offer also with our field missions on the ground. Our institutions are very much engaged. I think this is very, very well received.
Okay. I saw that there were others, and so I'm going to go here.
Hello, I'm Terry Hauptman from the Conflict Management Program at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. And I've just returned from 5 months in Vienna as a Fulbright Fellow working on the OSCE and interviewed many of the delegations and staff in the Secretariat and mission heads when they came to Vienna. And I really appreciate all of your emphasis on the important things that the OSCE is doing that are not recognized. On the other hand, it's very clear from talking to people that the organization now faces perhaps its most significant crisis, particularly with respect to leadership and budget, since there is no budget yet for 2024. There is no chair in office, with the possible exception of the North Macedonians continuing on a kind of interim basis next year. And as I understand it, none of the 4 senior officers have yet been selected for next year. And so the big question that certainly worries delegations in Vienna, as well as members of the staff of the Secretariat, is how are we going to solve this crisis so that not only the important things that the OSCE is now doing can continue, but also so that it can step up and play a more significant role on the really big issues like arms control, an end to the war in Ukraine, and so forth.
That's what I said in the beginning. Of course, we are facing challenges, budgetary challenges in the first place, because we didn't have an agreed budget in 22. We don't have an agreed budget in 23 because it's consensus, and we need 57. I think we have 56 now. Negotiations are ongoing. This is in the mandate of the chair that is very, very much engaged. But having said that, we are finding solutions. So all the work we do, for example, in Ukraine, is all through extra budgetary support. We have 30 countries that are supporting the programs there. A lot of the work we do, particularly on the women, peace and security agenda, empowerment of women, training, gender-based violence is also a horrible issue where we do a lot of work. It's all funded through extra budgetary support anyway, and I'm really grateful to all the countries that support us. So would I not prefer a strong, unified budget? I would, of course, yes. But in the absence of that, we will have to work with more and more extra budgetary support. On the other issues, this is indeed an ongoing process. We have a candidate that didn't find consensus. It's an ongoing process, but I'm quite confident that under the able leadership of North Macedonia, we'll find the solutions by the end of the year. But you're right, and I don't want to belittle that. The budget is a problem because that it creates a certain insecurity, because I can't pay programs through extra budgetary support. I cannot pay salaries. So, and this is in particular an issue for our field missions, because we are aligned to the UN salary scales. I'm not making that up. That's the UN salary scales. And in some cases, I think there's no field mission where we can pay 100%. But it varies depending indeed on the number of staff or so. So in some cases we're can only pay like 60%. All the more I'm really grateful to the fantastic staff we have that are so committed to work for the OSCE. But in the end, yes, we have seen a high turnover in some missions because people need to feed families. And if UN or NATO, you pays better, then of course at some point you have to leave. So that's why the fact that we're still going strong means that people believe in this organization and are very committed. So I'm really very proud of the staff we have. But at some point, indeed, we need to solve this, because salaries cannot be paid through extra budgetary support. So salaries have to be paid out of the unified budget. And of course that you hear. And this is what I also meant with the visibility issues. And I addressed it also here in my talks, is that the political support, also the public visible political support, helps in a situation where there is a lot of insecurity. It's affecting other organizations as well, but some organizations have a biannual budget, so they are not directly affected. In some cases, it's not consensus, so it's easier. In our case, annual budget, when I arrived, I was very much engaged in promoting reforms. One of the ideas was to go for a biannual budget, etc. And this was, of course, not really possible during the last months or so because the priorities were elsewhere.
Thank you so much.
But all the more important to have the support from the political support and indeed also the extra budgetary support, which really allows us to continue our strong work.
You know, this is an example of that innovation that I really have always felt OSCE can
We have been
do.
very creative.
Very creative.
You have been. With that, I'm going to take another online question. So, folks in the room, don't be aggrieved. I'll come back to you in a minute. But on migration, and can you talk to us a little bit about what the OSCE as an organization does to address issues related to migration? You talked a bit about some of the border security missions that you have.
So we don't have a real a mandate on migration as such. So we work on different aspects related to migration. Of course, particularly in the work we do on in the third dimension, but also when we, for example, work on border management, because we always work. Whatever we do is also when we work on the transnational threats and challenges, the so-called second dimension, we do it also with a human rights lens. That's very important. And then I've mentioned already the bigger issue of trafficking. That's of course not migration, but it's in a way it ties into that. So what I'm saying is we touch upon that, but we don't have a mandate. Like we have a very strong mandate to work on climate change, which was agreed in Stockholm in 21, or we have strong mandates on other issues. We don't have a clear mandate on migration as such, but we touch upon the different aspects.
Great. Anybody
and
else?
of course, even the work we do on climate change, when we try to help countries with adaptation, mitigation, etc., this is also, in a broader sense, helping, because if you have to leave your country because it's not, you can't live there anymore because of the impact of climate change.
Another reason to include the Mediterranean as
exactly.
Exactly. Impact for Europe.
For the room, I think we have time for one more question from the room. So do I have anyone? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Zhang, a professor of international relations at Fudan University, China. I'm now affiliated with the SAIS, Johns Hopkins University. So my question is about the interrelationships between OSCE and other regional organizations in Eurasia, like the Russia-led Economic Union of Eurasia, or like a Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which are very active in Central Asia. So how you manage these interrelationships between OSCE and these regional organizations. And on top of that, how you coordinate with the United Nations headquarters about achieving the UN 2030 goals for the SDG. Thank you.
So we are a regional organization under Chapter 8. So we have, of course, a very strong relationship with UN, not only at my level, so there are regular staff-to-staff talks. We work in the different departments with the also specialized UN agencies. I mentioned my personal strong support for the UN Secretary General and his new agenda for peace, which I think is very important to also in terms of promoting the role of regional organizations. So that is the first point I wanted to make. We work, we have a different level of cooperation with regional organizations. This is organically grown. With some organizations, there is a memorandum of understanding or it's institutionalized, like, for example, the Council of Europe. I have had several contacts, discussions with the CSTO, for example. When I was in Moscow in 2021, I visited their headquarters. I've met the Secretary General of other organizations. We don't have, because it's not our mandate, any connection with the Eurasian Economic Union. I think you mentioned them. But we have a role in or to work with regional organizations in partnerships. For me, the UN is, of course, absolutely key. Also, as we are a regional organization under Chapter 8, and of course, we in our different programs we try to promote the sustainable development goals within our different mandates. So that is an absolute objective or clear objective.
And I did have an online question about the organization's relationship with China, particularly given Chinese investment in Europe. Is this something that OSCE is looking at?
China is neither a participating states nor a partner of cooperation. So,
okay, thank you. All right. Anyone else? I think we are
Mongolia is our youngest member. Mongolia joined in 2014, I think.
Excellent. I think that brings us to really the end of our opportunity here. So I want to thank you very much for devoting your time to explaining some of the work of OSCE in the past and in the future, and looking at these challenges so frankly with us, because this is important. I think we all know the work that OSCE both has done and can do in the future.
And we can certainly see why Helga Schmid was able to get consensus. 57 participating states supporting her as the Secretary General. I think we've talked about consensus and the challenges of it. Maybe as a last point, Helga, we could ask you, you came in with this strong support of participating states. I think you still have it. You're doing this work. These complex times where simple agreements, let alone consensus, are very difficult to reach, times of distrust, political upheaval. What do you think we need to do? Some would ask, is it possible anymore to keep multilateral systems operating together and functioning for the purposes they have? What would be your final thoughts as we look ahead to this 50th anniversary and the important messages of what OSCE, because I think it's an absolutely vital and necessary platform. What
I think our added value is that we are what I would call a non-like-minded organization. So was it easier to work in the European Union? Probably yes, although not always. We also have our issues among family. It's sometimes even more emotional. But yes, it was easier, and I've never worked in NATO, but I'm sure it's easier there as well. But there is an absolute need to work with non-like-minded organizations, to give a space to non-like-minded organizations. The High Representative of the European Union launched the Schuman platform, which brought together in March, which brought together, I think it was a good idea, brought together not only EU candidate countries, but also many countries from Africa, Latin America, also some international organizations. And the President of the International Crisis Group was the moderator of the evening. And her plea was exactly that, give a role and a space to non-like-minded organizations. And that's what I mean when I say I support the Secretary General in his efforts, is because we all have our respective strengths, and that will be needed, and even more so in the future. Also when it comes to rebuilding trust and when it comes to solving some of the relevant issues there. And there, OSCE has its role and its space.
Trust, accommodation, compromise. Also,
also make sure that things don't spiral out of control. That's also very, very relevant. There can be the unintended accident that happens where things spiral out of control. That's why one issue I don't mention, we're also working on cyber, and we have this network of cyber focal points in all 57. It's also quite important, because if something happens, we cannot prevent that. But at least there is this mechanism, this consultation process, so things don't inadvertently spiral out of control. And for that, of course, you need to have the channels. Doesn't mean that you, I'm sometimes asked is, because when we sit around the table every Thursday, it's not there to exchange pleasantries, etc. But it's very important to keep channels.
It's a place to pass messages
in a principled manner, but to keep the channels open. I think that's very important, and that's also a role OSCE has always had, and has now, and will have in the future.
It's fundamental to diplomacy. It's fundamental to peace and dealing with that. And
that's the art of diplomacy, indeed.
we thank you so much for joining us here, making this part of your very busy agenda. The Wilson Center looks forward to maintaining close ties with OSCE as we look ahead to this 50th anniversary, and wherever we can help and engage. But
thank you so much
please
for
join
having
us
me.
It was our pleasure. Thank you so much.